Hey everybody, I'm Joe Killinger. I'm a real estate investor and entrepreneur. And we put these videos together every week to give you all the tips and insights from my experience over the last several years. So make sure you tune in and subscribe, and thank you. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. As you can see, we're still social distancing. First time in a suit for me for 2.5 months.
About that, me too.
You too?
It's been 2.5 months.
Still haven't shook hands.
Feels good.
Yeah, it feels really good.
Yeah.
You know, this is what we're going through is going to change the way a lot of things are done, especially in office, retail, well, across the board in all asset classes. But I asked George Pino, he's the CEO of Commercial Brokers International. As many of you know, I have him on here a lot because he's a good resource. Matter of fact, if you ever have a question, don't be afraid to reach out to him or reach out to me and I'll put you in contact. But we were having a conversation the other day and we were talking about office density. And, you know, it got to be a pretty interesting conversation. So, let's have George come in and talk to us about his thoughts on certain areas of office and, how offices are going to be affected by this. So, yeah. George, thank you for walking over here and doing this with us. I see in a lot of areas, especially in tech areas where they were really going in with high density, that's going to have to change, isn't it? Yeah. They're going to have to kind of backpedal on that?
I think with everything going on, absolutely there's going to be change. And what I'd like to do, I think it would be helpful for a lot of people, is kind of explain the history of the office density, kind of what happened.
Okay.
So you can have they can have a little bit of understanding. Back in the day, offices were built with, a lot of large executive office space, where the actual density was typically 3 to 4 people per 1,000 square feet.
Right.
And, even back then, even parking requirements were 3 per 1,000 square feet or 2 per 1,000 square feet, because that was the expectation. Now, since then, and as companies have become more efficient, density has gone up, where offices are smaller, people are working closer together, the cubicles are a lot smaller. They used to be, they used to be 9 by 9, then 8 by 8, then 6 by 6.
Right.
And so they got more and more people in. Nowadays, you even have just a table with workstations right next to each other, side by side. So density has gone up dramatically, up to 10 per 1,000.
Right.
And it has taxed a lot of some of the older buildings, the infrastructures, because they were never built to sustain that. And in fact, there's certain landlords have lease clauses where you can't have more than 6 people per 1,000 square feet that you rent.
Yeah.
So other landlords, however, that had the infrastructure that could accommodate the extra bodies because of the heat they generate and the power use and things like that, mainly high rises, they started gearing up and marketing toward a lot of these companies, mainly tech companies.
Sure.
And startups that were looking for high density, boiler rooms, phone call centers, things like that. So you had over the last few years, a big influx of tech companies coming in, especially in the Southern California, Silicon Beach, and also now downtown LA and Hollywood, where
downtown LA, they were really building for that. Right?
They were repurposing a lot of the buildings, and for that, where they were building the infrastructure, so they would have buildings that were older, but they would start putting in new AC units that were capable of handling the extra bodies and heat generations from the computers and workstations. And so they geared that.
Reshuffled.
Well, it's going to have to be reshuffled, I think, because in this day and age, even now, even when we open up finally, we haven't opened up yet, and I think when they do open up, we're still going to have that 6-foot rule. And nowadays I see workstations that are literally 2.5 feet away from each other. So
easily
you're gonna have to move a little bit, every other workstation, if that, if not even more. And so that's going to require some a little bit more space requirements for some of the tenants, or they're going to have to figure out a way to get around that and work with that. Either build a little bit more privacy cubicles, which
walls
then comes in some tenant improvements. Even if it's temporary, it is not necessarily conducive, I think, to the workplace. So I see that the office
what they were trying to do,
I think, absolutely, because the whole idea of high density in these tech companies was collaboration.
Right.
So they wanted to have a work environment that was collaborative. Now, I think you can still do that with space planning, but I think the density is going to drop dramatically. And then also what we have
You're gonna have to take on more office space probably to accommodate these people.
take on more office space. I think buildings in general are going to have to end up being a little bit less dense, especially when you start looking at high density areas. You know, the impact of the pandemic and any kind of virus for that matter, or any pandemic, typically is in high density areas. I mean, you can't compare apples to apples, you know, where you have to, rather I should say, you have to compare apples to apples. You can't compare oranges to apples in that, you know, New York that was hit so hard, one of the reasons I believe is because of the density. Everybody's so close together. You have mass transit systems. So when we start looking at that, you want, in the areas that, states that have not been hit that hard, Alaska and you know, Montana and
Sure.
whatnot, they're very low density states.
Well, to get people into the high rise, and I see what's happening in this building.
Right.
To come in, you know, there's a queue now to, you know, you're gonna be every 6 feet apart, 2 people in the elevator.
2 people per elevator,
That's gonna take a half hour to get people,
at least.
to move
'cause
through.
Imagine a 50-story building,
yeah.
you know, where.
Oh, yeah, I was talking about in this building.
In this building, yes.
It was gonna be like a half an hour, but
And-
yeah, you get a
but
taller building.
If you're in a 50, 60-story building in
24
downtown
story
LA, you know, that has a footprint of, let's call it, average building is probably about 17 to 20,000 square feet of footprint.
Right,
Maybe a little bit smaller depending on which one, but let's just call it 17,000. If you have a density of, medium density of 6, 7 per thousand, you know, you're looking at 70, 80 people just for that one floor, right? Actually, my math is bad, sorry, I usually use a calculator these days. It's probably about 120 people for that floor.
yeah, it's gonna be,
So-
in certain areas, there's gonna have to be a complete reshuffle, but let me ask you this,
Yeah.
this working from home, everybody, you know, what I'm finding is that people want to be in the office, don't think it's going to be affected, you know, that affected that much. Yes, some people will stay home. People that want to work from home, oh, this is going to be the new way of life. You know, it depends on who you talk to. So you're not really, it's kind of skewed to. But and I know it's hard to tell without opening these offices up, but do you think, you know, is there going to be 5% of the people working from home, 20% of the people working from home?
You know, it's hard to say, and I can only talk about experience and history. You know, we talked about the history of the buildings, density.
Right.
I'm a history buff, and you know, just going back, looking at companies that have tried the work at home experience, almost all of them have, at one point or another, called it back in. I mean, Yahoo was a key example. You know, they called everybody back and said no more working at home because the productivity does not happen. Also, people tend to be social. You know, we're animals. We're social animals,
Right.
and we crave. You know, we crave to be in that environment, even if it's a work environment. We crave to be next
Yeah.
to the people that we work with. We want to have that social interaction. You know, you see that now with everybody going crazy in the stay-at-home orders. That, you know, it's like I can't wait to get out there. You know, yes, the Zoom meetings have been great. They have been able to
Yeah,
help
that's where I
people
think.
along.
Like if Yahoo
But-
would have had more of
Yeah.
the systems that we have now, they might have been able to be more productive, but I'm just not really, I don't see a big number of people continuing to work from home like
No.
some people are saying. I think it's still, offices are gonna be needed. I do think there will be more office space requirements. Definitely gonna be completely redesigning floor plans.
Floor plans, not just floor plans, but also I think the flow, kind of like how they're doing in
Yeah.
grocery stores. So you're
Yeah.
going to have to redesign
Right.
how an office is actually designed,
Yeah.
where you're not having, especially larger offices, where you're not having a lot of cross traffic going back and
Mm-hmm.
forth, where it's going to be kind of almost like a one-way kind of traffic scenario. You're also going to start looking, I think, with I think companies will probably institute
Staggering.
staggered work days.
Yeah.
and perhaps even hours, depending on who they are and what type of company they're. You know, there's been some talk already about going to a 4-day work week,
Right.
and then staggering those days where people work. So you can
Until we're open, a lot of ifs are, you know,
Until we're
nobody
open,
knows.
a lot of ifs,
But and now, if
Yeah.
you do have a company and you really have questions about, you know, density and what you really need to be doing, you can contact George. I'll put his information down below. But you know, there's a lot of options for you to take a look at, and so you know, there's maybe more office space, maybe less office space if you have the ability to have people work from home. But there's a lot to work out, and George can be a great resource for you. So George, thank you for coming over today and doing the video.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in, and if you haven't done so, please do subscribe.